The smell hit him first. Ozone and hot asphalt. That particular scent of a summer storm rolling across sun-baked pavement. Marcus Chen stood in the open doorway of his garage, breathing it in, watching the sky turn the color of an old bruise. The air tasted metallic, electric, the way it always did before the sky opened up. Behind him, in the shadows of the garage, chrome gleamed like a promise. He didn't turn around. Not yet. The first drops were starting to fall, fat and heavy, each one making a sound like a small drum against the driveway. Tap, tap, tap. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening, and somewhere deep in his chest, something tightened like a fist. The motorcycle stood behind him. He could feel it there, the way you feel someone watching you in a dark room. A 1967 Honda CB 450 Black Bomber, factory original. Engine rebuilt with his own hands over 3 years of Saturday mornings and midnight oil changes. The leather seat still smelled like the 70s, that particular musk of old hide and time passing. When he sat on it, the frame fit his body like it had been waiting for him. Tap, tap, tap. The rain was coming harder now, and with it, the memory of his sister's voice on the phone this morning. Marcus, we need to talk about Emma's wedding. He'd been in the garage then too, buried elbow deep in a carburetor that didn't want to cooperate. His phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. The smell of parts cleaner had been sharp in his nostrils, almost medicinal. What about it? He'd asked, not really paying attention, focused on a stubborn bolt that had probably been last touched when Nixon was president. The dress. A pause. Heavy with something he couldn't name then. She found the dress, the one. You know how she's been looking for months. That's great, Diane. Really happy for her. The bolt had finally given way, and he'd felt that small surge of victory mechanics know, the inanimate object finally surrendering to persistence and the right amount of leverage. The thing is, Diane's voice had changed pitch, gone softer, the way it always did when she wanted something. It's a bit more than she budgeted. Mom and Dad already put in what they can, and Richard's family covered the venue, but how much more? He'd set down his wrench, suddenly alert to the shift in the conversation. 12,000. The number had hung in the air between them, transmitted through fiber optic cables and satellite signals. No, landing in his ear like a stone dropped in still water. $12,000? For a dress she'll wear once. It's not just a dress, Marcus. It's Vera Wang, vintage collection. She'll treasure it forever. And you know how important this is to her. After everything with Derek was an asshole who deserved the cheating allegations. Marcus had wiped his hands on a rag, leaving black smears across the red fabric. That's not our fault, and it's not a reason to... She's our baby sister. Diane's voice had turned sharp, accusatory. Our only sister. This is her day, and you're sitting there in that garage playing with that stupid bike. It's not stupid. The words had come out harder than he'd intended. Defensive, immediate. And I'm not playing. This is a hobby. It's a hobby, Marcus. Emma's happiness is more important than a hobby. Now, standing in the doorway with the rain falling in sheets and thunder rolling in from the west, Marcus let his eyes close. The conversation had spiraled from there. Diane's voice joined by their mother's. Then Emma herself, tearful and desperate, explaining how this dress was the only thing that had made her happy since the breakup, how she'd finally felt beautiful again when she tried it on, how the wedding was in 6 weeks, and if she didn't secure the dress now, it would be sold to someone else. The bike. They wanted him to sell the bike. It's just sitting there collecting dust, his mother had said when she'd called an hour later. You barely ride it anymore, and the money, Marcus, you could get at least 10, maybe 12,000 for it, couldn't you? I've seen those vintage motorcycle shows. People pay ridiculous amounts for old bikes. Old bikes, as if the CB 450 was just some rusted-out garage queen, not a perfectly preserved piece of engineering history, as if he hadn't spent countless hours tracking down original parts, hadn't driven to 3 different states to find the right carburetor kit, hadn't taught himself electrical wiring from manuals older than he was. I can't, he'd said, but his voice had sounded weak even to his own ears. Can't or won't? His mother's tone had cooled several degrees. Because there's a difference, Marcus. One is impossible. The other is just selfish. The rain was falling so hard now that he could barely see across the street. Water ran down the driveway in rivers, carrying leaves and small sticks toward the storm drain. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes, and goosebumps rose on his arms. Behind him, the motorcycle waited. Marcus turned slowly and looked at it. The black bomber sat on its kickstand, perfectly balanced, its fuel tank gleaming even in the dim light of the garage. The chrome exhaust pipes were spotless. He'd polished them last weekend with a special compound that cost $30 a bottle. The original Honda decals were still bright red and white, unfaded despite being 56 years old. The engine, when he'd last started it, had purred like a satisfied cat, smooth and powerful and utterly reliable. His father had once told him that every man should have one thing that was purely his own, one thing he didn't have to share, didn't have to justify, didn't have to compromise on. Oh, Marcus had been 12 when he'd heard that, sitting in this same garage while his father rebuilt a '69 Mustang that had eventually been sold to pay for Diane's college tuition. "But you said it was yours," Marcus had protested, watching his father carefully pack away the tools he wouldn't need anymore. It was. His father had smiled, but there'd been something sad in his eyes. "But family comes first, son. Always. Remember that." Marcus had remembered through college, working 2 jobs so he wouldn't burden his parents with loans, had remembered when Diane needed a down payment on her first house and he'd emptied his savings account, had remembered when his mother's car died and he'd co-signed on a new one, tying himself to a payment plan he didn't need. The family came first. Always. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Emma. "Marcus, please. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm begging you. This dress, it makes me feel like myself again. Like I'm not broken. Please don't make me give it up." A photo followed, Emma in a bridal shop, wearing what was undoubtedly an exquisite dress. Layers of ivory silk and lace, fitted bodice, a train that pooled around her feet like water. Her face was radiant, tear-streaked, hopeful. Another text. "I'll pay you back. I swear. After the wedding, Richard and I will save up and—" Marcus locked his phone without finishing the message. He'd heard those promises before. When Diane had borrowed money 15 years ago, she'd sworn she'd pay it back within a year. That was 3 apartments and 2 career changes ago, and the subject was never mentioned anymore. He walked into the garage, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The rain hammered on the roof, a constant percussion that seemed to match his heartbeat. When he reached the motorcycle, he put his hand on the seat, feeling the cool leather under his palm. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. The bike. Himself, his 12-year-old self who had promised to never be like his father, never give up the things that mattered. But family came first. Always. He pulled out his phone and opened the Classifieds app. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. For sale, 1967, Honda CB 450 Black Bomber. Factory original. Excellent condition. $12,000 OBO. The ad posted with a soft whoosh sound, barely audible over the rain. Within an hour, he had 15 messages. Within 2, someone offered to come look at it that evening. Rain be damned. "I've been looking for one of these in this condition for 5 years, the man wrote. "Don't sell it to anyone else. I'll bring cash." By the time the storm had passed and the evening sun was painting the wet streets gold, Marcus was handing over the keys to a stranger named Robert Huang, who looked at the CB 450 the way some men look at beautiful women, with reverence and barely controlled desire. "You're sure about this?" Robert asked, running his hand along the fuel tank with a touch so gentle it was almost reverent. "Because if you're not, I can walk away. No hard feelings. A bike like this, you don't let it go unless you're absolutely sure." Marcus thought about Emma's face in that photo. Thought about his mother's disappointment. Thought about being the bad guy at family dinners for the next decade if he refused. "I'm sure," he lied. Robert counted out $12,000 in $100 bills on the workbench where Marcus had rebuilt the engine. The money felt obscene somehow. Too much and not enough at the same time. Too much for a rational person to refuse for a hobby. Not enough for what he was really giving up. When Robert rolled the Black Bomber out of the garage and onto a trailer, Marcus turned away. He couldn't watch. The sound of the tie-down straps being secured, the metallic clicks and the creaking of the trailer springs felt like a physical pain in his chest. "Take care of her," he called out, not looking back. "Like she's made of glass," Robert promised. The truck pulled away and Marcus stood in his empty garage, staring at the oil stain on the floor where the kickstand had rested for 3 years. The smell of motor oil and old leather lingered in the air, growing fainter with each breath. His phone rang. Emma. Oh my God, Marcus, thank you, thank you, thank you. Her voice was bright with joy, words tumbling over each other. I can't believe. I mean, Diane just told me, and you're the best brother ever. I love you so much. This means everything to me, everything. Yeah, Marcus said, his voice flat. No problem. The wedding's going to be perfect now. You'll see. And you'll look so handsome in your tux, walking me down the aisle. Dad would be so proud, of both of us. You taking care of me like this? Their father had died 2 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and brutal, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had been at work when he got the call, and he'd driven to the hospital going 20 over the speed limit the whole way. But it hadn't mattered. Their father was already gone. At the funeral, Emma had been inconsolable. Diane had been stoic. Their mother had been silent, and Marcus had stood there wondering if his father had any regrets. If he'd wished he'd kept that Mustang, if he'd ever resented the family that came first. Always. Marcus, you still there? Yeah, I'm here. Listen, I have to go. The bridal shop needs the deposit tonight to hold the dress. But we'll celebrate soon, okay? Dinner at Mom's this Sunday. The whole family. We'll make your favorite, that pot roast you like. Sure, Sunday. After she hung up, Marcus walked back into the garage and pulled down the metal door, shutting out the evening light. In the darkness, he sat on the workbench where his motorcycle had lived, and he tried to remember why family was supposed to come first. The answer didn't come. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of family obligations and wedding preparations. Marcus threw himself into his job at the architectural firm, staying late, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid going home to that empty garage. His supervisor noticed the change, commented on it, gave him a raise and more responsibility. It didn't help. At night, he'd lie in bed scrolling through motorcycle forums, looking at photos of CB 450S, reading restoration threads. There was a dealer in Japan who specialized in vintage Hondas, another collector in Germany. Someone in Oregon had just finished a full rebuild and was documenting every step. Marcus had been one of those people once. He had posted updates every Saturday, sharing his progress, getting advice from other enthusiasts who understood the particular satisfaction of bringing a piece of history back to life. His last post had been the day before he'd sold the bike. Almost done with the electrical system. She runs like a dream now. He hadn't been back to the forum since. The wedding preparations consumed his family like a benign cancer, growing and spreading until there was no conversation that didn't circle back to centerpieces and seating arrangements and whether the string quartet should play Pachelbel or Vivaldi. Marcus attended the required events with a smile he'd learned to fake. The engagement party at his mother's house, where distant relatives he barely remembered commented on how successful he'd become, how generous to help his sister like this. The bachelor and bachelorette parties, separate events, thankfully, which meant he only had to endure Richard's obnoxious college friends for one evening of forced camaraderie at a brewery. Richard himself was fine, pleasant enough. Worked in finance, said things like synergy and leveraging assets without irony. He treated Emma well as far as Marcus could tell, remembered birthdays and anniversaries, made a decent living, but there was something hollow about him, some essential spark of personality that seemed to be missing. He was the human equivalent of a stock photo, technically correct but ultimately forgettable. You like him? Diane asked one evening when they were alone, stuffing party favors into tiny organza bags for the reception. Does it matter? Marcus tied off another bag, added it to the growing pile. He's going to be family. Then I guess I like him fine. Diane studied him for a moment, her hands going still. You're still mad about the bike? I'm not mad. He reached for another favor, a small bottle of honey with a custom label that read, meant to be in gold script. You're something. I'm tired, Di, that's all. Work's been busy. You got a raise. Yeah. And you're still miserable. Marcus set down the honey bottle and looked at his sister. Really looked at her. She'd gained weight since her divorce 3 years ago, and she wore it in her face, around her eyes. She looked older than 38, older than she should. Are you happy? He asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. What? With your life, your job, your apartment, your routine? Are you happy? Diane picked up another favor. So I turned it over in her hands. That's not... Happiness isn't really the point, is it? We do what we have to do. We take care of each other. We show up. Dad said every man should have one thing that's purely his own. Dad also worked himself into an early grave and died with $30,000 in credit card debt. Diane's voice was sharp. So maybe his advice isn't the gospel truth you think it is. Marcus stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. Run away. That's your solution to everything lately. He didn't respond, just grabbed his jacket and walked out into the cool spring evening. The wedding was in 2 days. Sunday afternoon at a venue that cost more than his yearly salary, with 300 guests and a reception that would run until midnight. Emma's dream day. Paid for, in part, by the black bomber gathering dust in Robert Huang's garage. Marcus walked for hours, letting his feet carry him through familiar neighborhoods. He passed the high school where he'd first learned to ride a motorcycle, a beat-up Honda Rebel that his friend Jake had taught him on in the empty parking lot on Sunday mornings. He passed the garage where he'd bought his first bike, a 1981 CB 750 that had barely run, but had felt like freedom in mechanical form. He ended up at the cemetery where his father was buried. The grave was simple. Michael Chen, beloved husband and father, with dates that spanned 54 years. There were fresh flowers. His mother came every week without fail, no matter the weather. Marcus sat on the grass beside the headstone, not caring that the ground was still damp from yesterday's rain. I sold the bike, he said to the stone, to the earth, to whatever remained of his father in this place. Just like you sold the Mustang. Family first, right? That's what you taught us. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind in the trees and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Did you regret it? Marcus asked. Did you ever wish you'd kept one thing for yourself? Just one? No answer came. He hadn't expected one. He stayed until the sun set and the cemetery gates were about to close, then walked home in the gathering darkness, his hands in his pockets, his thoughts circling like water going down a drain. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of spring day that wedding planners pray for. 72 degrees, light breeze, not a cloud in the sky. The venue was a restored Victorian mansion with gardens that looked like they'd been lifted from a storybook. Roses and wisteria, a fountain with actual swans, a gazebo wrapped in white tulle and flowers. Marcus arrived early, dressed in the rented tux that fit him perfectly because Emma had insisted on 3 separate fittings. He helped set up chairs, directed confused relatives to the bathrooms, smiled for photos with the groomsmen. Emma looked beautiful. There was no denying that. The Vera Wang dress fit her like it had been designed for her specifically, each bead and sequin catching the light, the train flowing behind her like a river of silk. She cried when she first saw herself in the mirror, and their mother cried, and Diane cried, and the makeup artist had to do touch-ups on everyone. Do I look okay? Emma asked Marcus when they had a quiet moment before the ceremony. You look perfect, he said, and meant it. Thank you for everything. For the dress, I mean. I know it was a lot to ask. It's your day. You deserve to be happy. She hugged him, careful not to wrinkle the dress, and he could feel her trembling slightly. I'm so nervous. Is that normal? Completely normal? What if I trip? What if I forget my vows? What if... You'll be fine. Richard's a lucky guy. Emma pulled back, studied his face. You really think so? Marcus hesitated just a moment too long, and something changed in Emma's expression, some small shadow of doubt crossing her features. But then the wedding coordinator was calling for them, and the moment passed. And Emma was taking his arm to walk down the aisle because their father wasn't there to do it. The ceremony was beautiful. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Richard's vows were conventional but sincere. Emma cried through hers, her voice breaking on the words about forever and choosing each other every day. Marcus stood with the groomsmen and watched his baby sister get married, and he felt nothing but a profound emptiness in his chest where something vital should have been. The reception was loud and expensive, and exactly what Emma had wanted. A live band, not a DJ. Filet mignon and Chilean sea bass for dinner. A 7-tier cake that cost more than Marcus's first car. Champagne flowing freely, laughter and dancing, and toasts that went on too long. Marcus drank more than he usually did. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to dull the edges of everything, to make the smiles easier, the small talk bearable. He danced with his mother, with Diane, with Emma during the brother-sister dance while everyone watched and took photos. Are you happy? Emma whispered as they swayed to some slow song he didn't recognize. I'm happy you're happy, he said, which wasn't an answer at all. Near the end of the night, when most of the older guests had left and the dance floor had turned into a sweaty mess of Richard's drunk college friends, Marcus stepped outside for air. The gardens were lit with string lights, soft and romantic, and the fountain burbled peacefully. He found a bench away from the main path and sat, loosening his bow tie, letting the cool air clear his head. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a notification. Probably Diane, wondering where he'd disappeared to. But it wasn't Diane. It was an email alert from a vintage motorcycle forum he still followed, even though he didn't participate anymore. The subject line made his blood run cold. 1967, Honda CB 450 Black Bomber sells for record price at auction. His hands were shaking as he opened the email. Someone had posted a link to an auction house website. There were photos, detailed, professional photos of a Black Bomber in pristine condition. The same bike. He could tell by the specific pattern of the original pinstriping, by the way the chrome had aged on the left handlebar. His bike. The selling price made him read it 3 times to be sure he wasn't hallucinating from the champagne. $287,000. $287,000. Or for a motorcycle he'd sold 6 weeks ago for $12,000. The article explained it. Vintage Honda CB 450S in factory original condition had become incredibly rare. Most had been modified or destroyed. But more than that, this particular bike had won Best in Show at a prestigious vintage motorcycle competition in Tokyo last month. The seller, Robert Huang, had documented its perfect provenance, its completely original parts, its mint condition. The bike Marcus had restored with his own hands over 3 years. The bike he'd sold to buy his sister a dress that would be worn once, then packed away in a box. Marcus sat very still on that bench in the garden, surrounded by fairy lights and the distant sound of music and laughter, and something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. His phone slipped from his numb fingers and fell into the grass. He thought about the raise at work he'd gotten by throwing himself into extra projects to avoid an empty garage. About his father dying with debt despite a lifetime of putting family first. About Diane, divorced and unhappy at 38, still stuffing party favors alone on Friday nights. About Emma, radiant in her $250,000 moment, married to a man who said synergy without irony. He thought about what he'd given up and what he'd gotten in return, and the math didn't work out no matter how he tried to calculate it. Inside the reception hall, someone laughed loudly, the sound carrying across the garden. The band started playing Don't Stop Believin', and drunk voices sang along, off-key and enthusiastic. Marcus bent down, picked up his phone, read the article again. $287,000. The buyer was a collector in Dubai who'd apparently been searching for a Black Bomber for his private museum. A museum. His motorcycle, the one he'd rebuilt bolt by bolt, learning electrical systems from manuals and carburetor tuning from YouTube videos, and patience from pure necessity, was going to sit in a climate-controlled museum in Dubai. Perfect and pristine and utterly untouched. Not ridden, not loved, just displayed. He started laughing then, soft and bitter, because what else could he do? The alternative was screaming, and this was still Emma's wedding, and family came first. Always. Marcus stood up, smoothed down his tux, and walked back toward the reception. He'd finish the night. He'd smile for the final photos. He'd help clean up, load gifts into cars, make sure his drunk cousin didn't drive home. He'd do all the things that good brothers, good sons, good family members did, and then he'd go home to his empty garage and figure out how to live with himself. The music got louder as he approached. Through the windows, he could see Emma and Richard dancing, surrounded by friends and family, both of them glowing with happiness and champagne and the certainty that they'd made the right choice, that this was the beginning of their perfect life together. Marcus stepped through the door, back into the noise and light and celebration. He didn't see the black ice on the marble floor just inside the entrance, condensation from the open doors mixing with spilled champagne. Didn't feel his foot slip until it was too late. The fall happened in slow motion and in an instant. Both at once. His body twisting, hands reaching for purchase on empty air, the back of his head connecting with the marble edge of a decorative column with a sound that was wrong. Too solid. Too final. The music continued for a few more seconds before someone noticed. Then, the screaming started. Marcus lay on the floor, vision swimming, pain radiating through his skull. He could see the chandelier above him, crystal and gold, spinning slowly. Could hear voices, urgent and panicked, but the words wouldn't resolve into meaning. Someone was crying. Emma, probably. He hoped she wouldn't let this ruin her wedding day. The chandelier spun faster, or maybe that was his vision failing. The edges of everything going dark, contracting to a pinpoint of light that grew smaller and smaller. His last coherent thought was about the motorcycle. About how Robert Huang had probably never even ridden it before selling it to the highest bidder. About how it would sit in that museum, gathering dust in a different way, and nobody would know that Marcus Chen had spent 3 years bringing it back to life, learning and failing and trying again until he got it right. Nobody would know, and it didn't matter anymore. The light went out. Marcus opened his eyes to the smell of motor oil and old leather. For a moment, he didn't move. Didn't think, just breathed in that familiar scent and tried to remember where he was. The back of his head throbbed with phantom pain, but when he reached up to touch it, there was nothing there. No blood, no wound, just his own hair, slightly greasy from not washing it this morning. This morning, he blinked, focused on what he was seeing. A garage. His garage. But wrong somehow. The workbench was covered with tools he'd organized 2 years ago. The pegboard on the wall had the old arrangement before he'd reorganized it. The calendar showed April 2023. April 2023. 3 years ago. Marcus sat up slowly, his heart beginning to race. He was sitting on the concrete floor beside his workbench, in exactly the position he'd been in that Saturday morning when he'd been rebuilding the carburetor on the CB 450. He turned his head, slowly, hardly daring to look. The black bomber stood on its kickstand 3 feet away, engine partially disassembled, carburetor kit spread out on the workbench, exactly as he'd left it that morning 3 years ago when Diane had called about Emma's wedding dress. No, not 3 years ago. This morning. His phone sat on the workbench, screen dark. Marcus reached for it with a hand that trembled slightly. The time read 9:47 a.m., Saturday, April 15th, 2023. The day Diane had called. The day the storm had rolled in. The day he'd posted the ad and sold the bike and started the chain of events that had led to a marble floor and a head injury and what? Death? Had he died? Marcus pressed his palms to his eyes, trying to make sense of it. The last thing he remembered was the chandelier spinning, going dark, Emma screaming, the wedding, the article about the auction, $287,000. Then waking up here, now, 3 years in the past. He looked at his hands, turned them over, examining them like they belonged to someone else. They looked the same, felt the same. The scar on his right thumb from a slipped screwdriver was there, 3 years old instead of 6, but present. This was insane. Impossible, except he could smell the motor oil, could feel the cold concrete under him, could see the calendar on the wall showing April 2023 in black and white certainty. His phone buzzed. Marcus stared at it like it was a live snake. It buzzed again. With movements that felt like they belonged to someone else, he picked it up. The screen showed an incoming call. Diane. He knew what she was going to say. Knew every word before she spoke them, because he'd lived this conversation once already, 3 years ago in a future that hadn't happened yet. His finger hovered over the answer button. If he answered, Diane would tell him about Emma's dress, would explain about the budget and the Vera Wang, and how much it meant to their baby sister. Would, over the course of hours and days, rebuild the pressure until Marcus agreed to sell the motorcycle. And this time, he knew what would happen. Knew Robert Huang would take immaculate care of it. Knew it would sell for $287,000 in an auction. Knew that money would go to someone else while Marcus walked into Emma's wedding with a gift worth a fraction of what he'd given up. The phone continued to ring. Marcus thought about his father, dying with debt and regrets. Thought about the empty garage he'd come home to every night for 6 weeks. Thought about standing at that wedding in a rented tux, smiling while something vital hollowed out inside him. The phone rang one more time. He declined the call. For several long moments, Marcus sat in the silence of his garage, holding his phone, staring at the black bomber. His heart was racing, adrenaline flooding his system. To fight-or-flight response kicking in even though there was nothing to fight and nowhere to flee. He'd just changed history, something as small as declining a phone call, and the future he remembered, or thought he remembered, or had hallucinated in his dying moment, would unfold differently. If it was real, if any of this was real. The phone buzzed again. A text from Diane. Call me when you get a chance. About Emma's wedding? Marcus stared at the message. 3 years ago, or this morning, depending on how you measured time, he would have called back immediately. Would have been the good brother, the reliable son, the family member who showed up and said yes and made sacrifices without complaint. That Marcus had died on a marble floor after giving away a fortune to buy a dress. This Marcus stood up, walked to the motorcycle, and put his hand on the fuel tank. The metal was cool under his palm, smooth and perfect. Original paint, original chrome, original everything. 3 years of work, countless hours of research and restoration and learning. Worth $287,000. Or worth something else entirely, something that couldn't be measured in auction prices and museum displays. He pulled out his phone and typed a response to Diane. Busy today. Can it wait until next week? The reply came within seconds. It's about Emma's dress. Kind of time sensitive. Marcus considered his options. He could ignore it, but Diane would just call their mother, who would call him, and Emma would eventually call crying, and the whole machinery of family obligation would grind into motion, or he could confront it head on. He typed, "What about it?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared. T appeared again. Finally, she found the dress, but it's over budget. Can you call me? Marcus looked at the motorcycle, at the tools spread across his workbench, at the calendar showing April 2023, giving him a chance he shouldn't have, couldn't have, but apparently did have. He typed, "How much over?" The response took longer this time. Diane was probably calculating how to phrase it, how to make it sound reasonable. 12,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but Marcus didn't read the rest. He knew the arguments already, knew the emotional manipulation, the family loyalty speech, the implications that refusing made him selfish and uncaring. He typed back, "That's a lot of money for a dress. It's not just a dress, it's her wedding dress, her special day. After everything with Derek, she deserves to feel beautiful." There it was. The guilt trip, right on schedule. Marcus took a deep breath. In the future, he remembered he'd caved to this pressure, had sold the bike, had watched Emma walk down the aisle in that $250,000 moment, had died for it. He typed, "I understand it's important to her, but I can't help financially." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. He could practically feel Diane's frustration through the phone. Can't or won't, and there was his mother's line delivered early, the same one that had cut through his defenses 3 years ago. Marcus thought about the architectural firm, about the raise he'd gotten by burying himself in work to avoid an empty garage, about the fact that right now, in April 2023, he hadn't gotten that raise yet, was still at his old salary, still in his old position. Because he hadn't needed to escape into work, because the garage hadn't been empty, because he'd made a different choice. He typed, "I won't. The bike isn't for sale." The response came immediately. "This is about that stupid motorcycle?" "It's not stupid. And yes, Emma is your sister, and the bike is mine." 3 dots. Disappear. 3 dots. Disappear. Finally, wow. Okay, good to know where your priorities are. Marcus felt the guilt trying to sink its hooks into him, the familiar weight of family obligation pressing down. But underneath it, something else was emerging. Something that felt like anger, clean and bright. He typed, "My priorities are fine. Emma's wedding budget is her responsibility, not mine. When did you become so selfish?" The question sat on his screen, accusatory and sharp. 3 years ago, it would have destroyed him. Would have made him immediately apologize, backtrack, agree to sell the bike just to prove he wasn't the villain they were painting him as. But that was 3 years ago. Or 3 years in the future. Or both. Marcus put his phone down without responding and turned his attention back to the motorcycle. The carburetor kit still needed to be installed. The electrical system still needed final testing. The bike was so close to being complete. Just a few more weekends of work. His phone buzzed repeatedly over the next hour. Texts from Diane. A call from his mother that he let go to voicemail. More texts from Diane. Eventually, a tearful message from Emma herself, her voice breaking. "Marcus, please. I don't understand why you're being like this. I thought you loved me. I thought family meant something to you." He listened to the whole message. Heard the genuine pain in her voice and still didn't call back. Because he did love her. Did value family. But he loved himself, too, apparently. Finally. And family loyalty, he was beginning to understand, shouldn't be a one-way street paved with sacrifice and resentment. Sunday dinner at his mother's house was usually mandatory, usually a comfort, usually the one time each week when the family gathered without agenda or drama, just food and conversation and the familiar rhythms of belonging. Marcus drove there Sunday evening with his stomach in knots, knowing what was waiting for him. His mother's house was a small 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, the same house she'd lived in for 30 years. The driveway already held Diane's SUV and Emma's sedan. Richard's BMW was notably absent. Apparently this was family business. Not for outsiders. Marcus parked on the street and sat in his car for a moment, gathering himself. Through the front window he could see movement, figures passing back and forth, probably setting the table, getting dinner ready. The normalcy of it felt surreal. He got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before he could knock, it opened. Diane stood there, arms crossed, expression cold. "Glad you could make it," she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Diane." "Mom's in the kitchen. Emma's in the living room crying. Hope you're proud of yourself." Marcus pushed past her into the house. The smell of pot roast hit him. His favorite, just like in the future he remembered. His mother must have been cooking it since this morning, the meat slow roasting for hours until it fell apart at a touch. The guilt weapon was already loaded. His mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Susan Chen was 62 years old, gray-haired and soft-spoken, and she had perfected the art of the disappointed look over decades of parenting. She deployed it now. "Marcus." "Hi, Mom. We need to talk." "I figured." She gestured toward the dining room. "After dinner. Let's eat first." It was a distinctly Chinese approach to confrontation. Feed everyone first, then discuss the problem. Marcus had grown up with this pattern. Big family decisions were always made after meals, when everyone was full and theoretically more reasonable. Emma appeared in the living room doorway. Her eyes were red, makeup smudged. When she saw Marcus, her face crumpled. "How could you?" she whispered. "Emma, I asked you for one thing, and you said no, like I'm nothing to you." "What, like my happiness doesn't matter?" Marcus felt something twist in his chest. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Emma's voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? I've never asked you for anything before." "Never. And the one time I need you, you choose a stupid motorcycle over me." "It's not stupid. It's a thing. Metal and rubber and whatever. I'm your sister. I'm real. And you care more about a thing than you do about me." Diane appeared behind Emma, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Let's sit down. Mom made dinner." "I'm not hungry," Emma said, but allowed herself to be guided to the dining room anyway. The meal was excruciating. Pot roast that tasted like sawdust in Marcus's mouth. Roasted vegetables he had to force down. Conversation that started and died repeatedly, killed by the tension in the room. His mother tried to keep things light. Asking about work, about the weather, about mundane topics that everyone answered in monosyllables. Emma picked at her food, not eating, occasionally wiping her eyes with her napkin. Diane ate mechanically, her jaw tight. Finally, when the plates were mostly cleared and the silence had become unbearable, Susan Chen set down her fork and looked at her son. "Explain it to me," she said quietly. "Help me understand why you're doing this." Marcus set down his own fork. His hands were shaking slightly and he pressed them flat against the table to steady them. "The motorcycle isn't just a hobby to me," he said. "It's 3 years of work. 3 years of learning and building and creating something. It's worth more than $12,000. "I know you worked hard on it," his mother said. "But Emma wants an expensive dress. So that's not an emergency. That's not a necessity. That's a want." "It's my wedding," Emma burst out. "It's the most important day of my life." "Is it?" Marcus looked at her directly. "Is the dress what makes it important? Would you love Richard less if you wore a dress that cost $1,000 instead of $12,000? "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Emma's face flushed. "The point is that you're my brother, and you're supposed to support me." "I do support you. I'm happy you're getting married. But supporting you doesn't mean funding every expense." "So it's about the money?" Diane interjected. "You're really going to let $12,000 come between you and your sister?" "It's not about the money. It's about what I'm giving up." "A motorcycle!" Emma's voice broke. "You're choosing a motorcycle over me. I'm choosing myself." Marcus said, and the words seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The silence that followed was absolute. His mother spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you say?" "I'm choosing myself. For once, I'm choosing something that matters to me, that I worked for, that I built with my own hands. I'm choosing not to sacrifice everything every time someone in this family needs something." "Everything?" Diane laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think you sacrifice everything? You have a good job, your own house, no kids to support. You have it easy, Marcus. I co-signed your car loan when you couldn't get approved on your own. I lent you $15,000 for your down payment that you never paid back. I worked 2 jobs through college so I wouldn't burden mom and dad. I've spent 32 years being the reliable one, the one who says yes, the one who shows up, and I'm tired." "So we're keeping score now?" Diane's face was flushed. "Tallying up every time you've helped family like it's some kind of transaction? When do I get to ask for help?" Marcus could hear his voice rising, feel the anger that had been building for years, or 3 days, depending on how you counted, finally breaking free. "When do I get to say no? When is it okay for me to have one thing that's mine, that I don't have to share or sacrifice or give up for the greater good?" "When you stop being part of a family," his mother said quietly. The words landed like a physical blow. Susan Chen's face was sad but certain. "That's what family means, Marcus. Sacrifice. Putting each other first. Your father understood that. He worked until it killed him to give us all a good life, and died in debt with nothing to show for it." Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Is that what you want for me? To work myself to death, give everything away, and die with nothing that's mine?" "Your father had us," his mother said, her voice hardening. "He had a family who loved him. That was enough." "Was it? Did you ever ask him? Did he tell you about the Mustang he gave up for Diane's college? Did he ever mention that he used to rebuild cars before he got married and had kids and had to be responsible every second of every day for 30 years? His mother's face went white. "Don't you dare. He told me once that every man should have one thing that's purely his own. And then he spent the rest of his life ignoring his own advice. He spent the rest of his life being a good father and husband," Susan said, standing now too. "Something you apparently can't be bothered with." "I'm not married. I don't have kids. Emma's wedding isn't my responsibility." "She's your sister," Emma sobbed from her chair. "Doesn't that mean anything?" Marcus looked at her tear-stained face and her hurt eyes, and felt the guilt trying to drag him under. But underneath the guilt was something stronger now, something that had been forged in the moment he died on a marble floor and woken up with a second chance. "It means I love you," he said. "It means I want you to be happy. But it doesn't mean I have to fund your happiness at the expense of my own. The bike is just a thing. So is the dress," Marcus said quietly. The silence that followed was different this time. Shocked. Absolute. "Get out," Diane said. "Diane," their mother started. "No. He wants to put himself first? Fine. He can do it somewhere else. Get out of this house, Marcus." Marcus looked at his mother, waiting for her to intervene. To tell Diane that was too far. To mediate, the way she always had when they were kids fighting over toys or territory. Susan Chen said nothing. "Mom?" Marcus said. She turned away, facing the kitchen, her shoulders tight. "I think you should go." Emma was crying in earnest now, her face in her hands. Diane stood like a sentinel, pointing toward the door. His mother's back was rigid with disappointment. Marcus picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, walked through the living room, past family photos on the walls, Christmas mornings, birthdays, graduations, all of them smiling together, a unit. He opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind him, he heard Emma's broken voice. "I hate you!" The door closed. Marcus stood on his mother's front porch, in the gathering dark, and felt the finality of it settle over him like snow. He'd done it. He'd chosen himself. He'd said no. And it felt terrible. He got in his car and drove home, his hands steady on the wheel, even though everything inside him was shaking. The garage door opened with its familiar rumble, and there was the black bomber, still partially disassembled, still waiting for him to finish the restoration. Worth $287,000. Worth his family, apparently. Marcus sat in his car in the dark garage for a long time, engine off, just breathing. Tomorrow, Diane would probably call the rest of the family. Aunts and uncles, cousins, everyone who'd been invited to the wedding. She'd tell them what Marcus had done, how selfish he'd been. The story would spread through the family network like wildfire. And by the end of the week, everyone would know that Marcus Chen had chosen a motorcycle over his sister's happiness. They wouldn't hear his side, wouldn't know about the 3 years of work, the knowledge of what the bike was worth, wouldn't understand that he'd already spent a lifetime sacrificing, and this was the one time, the one thing he was keeping for himself. They'd just know he'd said no. And in Chinese family politics, saying no to family was the ultimate betrayal. Marcus finally got out of the car and went into his house. Microwaved some leftovers he didn't taste, sat on his couch staring at the TV without seeing it. His phone sat silent on the coffee table. No calls, no texts. The family communication network had gone dark, which meant they were all talking to each other about him, not to him. He was being iced out. At midnight, he gave up on sleep and went back to the garage, turned on the bright work lights, picked up his tools. The carburetor kit wasn't going to install itself. He worked through the night, his hands finding the familiar rhythms of mechanical work, the precision and patience required to coax old metal back to life. By the time the sun came up, the carburetor was installed and the engine was ready for testing. Marcus turned the key. The Black Bomber roared to life, smooth and powerful, the exhaust note perfect. He let it run for a few minutes, listening to the engine, making sure everything was balanced and right. Then he shut it off and sat on the concrete floor, exhausted, filthy, and completely alone. But the bike was his. The next few weeks were among the hardest of Marcus's life. The family silence was absolute. No calls, no texts, no invitations to Sunday dinner. Emma's wedding invitations went out. Marcus's arrived in the mail with the rest, printed on expensive cardstock with elegant calligraphy, but there was no personal note, no phone call asking him to walk her down the aisle. He wasn't cut out entirely, just reduced. From brother to distant relative, someone who merited a seat at the reception, but not a role in the ceremony. Work became his refuge. Marcus threw himself into projects with a focus he hadn't had before, and his supervisor noticed. "Whatever's going on with you lately," she said one afternoon, "keep it up. This is your best work." He didn't tell her he was working harder to avoid going home to a house that felt too empty, too quiet, too full of phantom voices asking him why family didn't matter anymore. The garage became his sanctuary. Every evening after work, Marcus would spend hours with the Black Bomber finishing the restoration. The electrical system was completed, the chrome polished to a mirror shine, the original seat leather conditioned until it gleamed. Every bolt, every wire, every component checked and double-checked until the motorcycle was exactly as it had been when it rolled off the Honda factory floor in 1967. Perfect. He took photos, documented everything, posted updates to the Vintage Motorcycle Forum. The community there was enthusiastic, knowledgeable, supportive. They understood the work he'd put in, the skill required, the value of what he'd created. Beautiful restoration. Someone commented, "What's your plan? Keep it or sell it?" Marcus stared at the question for a long time before answering, "Keep it. This one's mine." The responses were universally positive. "Good for you. These bikes are meant to be ridden and enjoyed, not just collected." "What's it worth in that condition?" another user asked. Marcus thought about the future he remembered. About Robert Huang and the auction in the museum in Dubai. About $287,000. "Priceless," he typed. 3 weeks after the dinner at his mother's house, Marcus received a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Marcus Chen?" A male voice, polite but businesslike. "Yes?" "This is Robert Huang. I'm calling about your Honda CB 450 Black Bomber. I saw your restoration thread on the Vintage Motorcycle Forum. Is the bike for sale?" Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Robert Huang, the man who, in another timeline, had bought the bike for $12,000 and sold it for nearly $300,000? "It's not for sale," Marcus said. "I understand. Beautiful bikes like that. They're hard to let go. But I'm a serious collector, and I'd be willing to make you a very generous offer. Would you be open to discussing it?" "No, thank you, but no. I haven't told you the price yet." "Doesn't matter. The bike isn't for sale." A pause. "Mr. Chen, I've been looking for a CB 450 in this condition for 5 years. If price is the concern, I promise you I can meet any reasonable—" "Mr. Huang," Marcus interrupted, I'm sure you're a serious collector. I'm sure you'd take excellent care of the bike, but it's not about the money. It's mine, and I'm keeping it. Another pause, longer this time. I respect that. If you ever change your mind, please call me. He rattled off a phone number that Marcus didn't write down. After he hung up, Marcus sat in his living room, staring at his phone. He'd just turned down what could have been a substantial offer, money that would have made his life easier, his bank account healthier, his future more secure. But the bike would have been gone. And he'd already made that trade once. Once was enough. The weeks turned into months. Spring became summer. Emma's wedding approached like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and dreaded. Marcus received one more communication from his family before the big day. A text from Diane, short and cold. Mom wants to know if you're bringing a +1 to the wedding. He typed back, no, fine. 1 seat, don't be late. That was it. No thawing of relations, no reconciliation, just logistics. Marcus bought a new suit for the wedding. Not rented. He'd be damned if he was going to show up in a rental tux after everything that had happened. He found a tailored navy suit that fit him perfectly, spent more than he usually would on clothing, paired it with a crisp white shirt and a tie that Emma's favorite color, pale blue. He was angry with his family, hurt by their silence, bitter about the ultimatums and guilt trips. But Emma was still his sister, and he'd still show up. The morning of the wedding, Marcus woke early and went for a ride on the Black Bomber. The bike ran perfectly, every component working in harmony, only the engine purring with the satisfaction of a well-executed restoration. He rode for hours, taking back roads through the countryside, feeling the wind and the sun and the pure physical joy of motion. The bike handled like a dream, responsive and powerful and utterly reliable. This was what he'd saved. This freedom, this joy, this perfect mechanical marriage of engineering and art. He got back to his house around noon, gave himself time to shower and dress. The navy suit fit him well, made him look older, more serious. Professional. Marcus looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. 3 months ago, he'd been someone who said yes automatically, who sacrificed without question, who measured his worth by how much he could give away. Now he was someone who said no, who kept things for himself, and who valued his own happiness alongside others. The transformation felt seismic and completely invisible all at once. He drove to the wedding venue, the same Victorian mansion with the gardens and the fountain, exactly as he remembered. Early afternoon sun filtered through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. 300 chairs were arranged in perfect rows. The string quartet was warming up. Emma's perfect day, unfolding exactly as planned. Marcus found his seat, back row, far right, as far from the family section as possible while still being at the wedding. The seating chart spoke volumes. Other guests arrived, relatives he recognized, friends of Emma and Richard he'd met at the engagement party. Everyone dressed up, everyone smiling, everyone excited for the celebration. No one sat next to Marcus. The seats on either side of him remained conspicuously empty, even as the venue filled up. Whether by coincidence or design, he was isolated, quarantined from the family proper. He didn't care, or told himself he didn't care, or cared but was doing it anyway because showing up mattered, even when it was hard. The ceremony started right on time. The string quartet played. The groomsmen walked down the aisle, Richard among them looking nervous and excited. The bridesmaids followed, Diane among them in a dress that probably cost a fortune. Then Emma. She appeared at the back of the aisle in her Vera Wang dress, the $12,000 dress, the dress that was supposed to make her feel beautiful again after Derek's betrayal. And she did look beautiful. There was no denying that. But something was different from the future Marcus remembered. In that timeline, he'd walked her down the aisle because their father was dead. In this timeline, their Uncle James was offering Emma his arm. Uncle James, their father's older brother, a man Marcus had maybe seen a dozen times in his life. Pleasant enough, but distant, geographically and emotionally. He lived in Oregon, had his own family, his own life. Emma had chosen him over Marcus. Marcus watched them walk down the aisle together, Emma radiant in her expensive dress, Uncle James looking proud and slightly confused about why he'd been given this honor. They passed Marcus's row without a glance, without acknowledgement. The ceremony proceeded. The vows, the rings, the kiss. Emma and Richard were pronounced married. And everyone stood and applauded as they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Emma's eyes swept across the crowd, bright with joy and tears. They passed over Marcus like he was furniture. The reception was held in the gardens, under a tent that had probably cost as much as a used car. Dinner was served, filet mignon and Chilean sea bass, just as he remembered. The speeches were long and heartfelt. Diane's maid of honor toast was funny and touching, making everyone laugh and cry. She didn't mention Marcus once. Throughout it all, Marcus sat at his assigned table with strangers, friends of Richard's parents, polite people who made small talk about the weather and the food and how beautiful Emma looked. No one asked about his relationship to the bride. No one seemed to know or care who he was. He was a ghost at his own sister's wedding. The dancing started. Marcus watched from the sidelines as Emma and Richard had their first dance, as she danced with Uncle James for the father-daughter dance, as the party kicked into full swing. He should leave. There was no reason to stay. He'd shown up, had proven he cared enough to be here despite everything. His obligation was fulfilled. But something kept him in his chair, watching. Maybe masochism, maybe hope that someone would approach him, acknowledge him, open a door to reconciliation. No one did. Around 9 o'clock, as the party was reaching its peak and the older guests were starting to filter out, Marcus stood up to leave. He'd fulfilled his duty, shown his face, sent a gift, a generous check, more than he could really afford, but wanting to prove something to himself, if no one else. He was done. He made his way through the crowd toward the exit, weaving between dancing couples and laughing groups, almost free, almost to his car, almost able to leave this day behind him. Marcus. He turned. Emma stood there, still in her wedding dress, makeup slightly smudged, cheeks flushed from dancing and champagne. She looked happy. Looked like a bride who'd gotten everything she wanted. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." "I wasn't sure you would." They stood in the awkward silence of two people who used to be close and weren't anymore. "The dress is beautiful," Marcus offered. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Emma twisted her hands together, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Listen, I wanted to say—" "It's okay," Marcus interrupted. "You don't have to. I hate that you're not in any of the photos," she burst out. "I hate that we haven't talked in 3 months. I hate that I asked Uncle James instead of you to walk me down the aisle. And I hate that I did it because I was angry and wanted to hurt you. And I hate that it worked." Marcus felt something crack in his chest. "Emma." "But I also hate that you said no." Her eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I hate that a stupid bike mattered more than making me happy on my wedding day. I hate that you chose yourself over family. And I hate that I still love you even though I'm so angry with you I can barely breathe sometimes." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by fairy lights and the distant sound of music. And Marcus realized this was the moment. The chance to apologize, to bridge the gap, to say the right things, and maybe start to repair what had been broken. "I don't regret it," he said instead. Emma flinched like he'd slapped her. "I love you," Marcus continued. "I'm happy you're married. I'm glad today was everything you wanted it to be. But I don't regret keeping the bike." "Even though it cost you your family?" "Did it?" Marcus looked at her directly. "Or did I just finally see what the price of admission has always been? Sacrifice everything, give up everything, say yes to everything, or you're selfish? You're not a real family member? You're disposable. That's not—" "We don't—" Emma struggled for words. "We're family. Family takes care of each other." "In one direction, apparently. When did any of you take care of me?" Emma stopped, confused. "You never needed anything." "Because I never asked." Because I was too busy being the reliable one, the one who shows up, the one who says yes." Marcus felt the words pouring out of him. 3 months of isolation and anger-finding voice. "Did you know I co-signed Diane's car? That I lent her 15 grand she never paid back? That I worked 2 jobs through college so mom and dad wouldn't have to pay for it? That I've spent my entire adult life being the solution to other people's problems?" No, I didn't know. Because I didn't make it a big deal. I just did it. Because that's what family does, right?" Marcus laughed, bitter. "Except when I finally, for the first time in my life, said I wanted to keep something for myself, the entire family cut me off." Emma wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup further. "It felt like you were choosing a thing over people." "Over me? I was choosing myself for once, and apparently that's unforgivable. It's not. Emma took a shaky breath. Marcus, I don't want to fight. Not today. Not on my wedding day. Then don't. Go back to your party, dance with your husband, enjoy your perfect day in your perfect dress. He couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. You got what you wanted. Not all of it, Emma whispered. My brother's not in my wedding photos. She turned and walked back toward the reception, her dress swirling around her, leaving Marcus standing alone in the gathering darkness. He waited until she disappeared into the crowd, then walked to his car. Got in. Drove home through streets that seemed emptier than usual, quieter than they should be on a Saturday night. The garage door opened. The black bomber sat there, gleaming and perfect and utterly his, worth $250,000 in a future that wouldn't happen now, worth his family apparently, worth the isolation and the anger and the bitterness, and the long, lonely Sunday dinners for one. Marcus sat in his car and asked himself the question that had been hovering at the edges of his mind for 3 months. Was it worth it? The bike sat silent, offering no answers. The months after Emma's wedding were a study in loneliness. Marcus threw himself into work with even more intensity, taking on every project offered, volunteering for overtime, building a reputation as the person who could solve impossible problems and meet unreasonable deadlines. His supervisor promoted him, not the raise he'd gotten in the other timeline, but close. More responsibility, better pay, a corner office with a view. Success by every traditional measure. He bought a new motorcycle helmet, top of the line, carbon fiber, and advanced ventilation. Bought riding gear that cost more than his first car, started taking long weekend rides, exploring back roads in small towns, sleeping in cheap motels and eating at diners, just him and the black bomber and the endless ribbon of asphalt. He joined a vintage motorcycle club, attended shows and rallies. The community welcomed him, respected his restoration work, admired the bike. He made friends, other riders who understood the appeal of old machines, the satisfaction of keeping history alive. But they weren't family. Birthdays came and went, acknowledged only by automated messages from his phone company and credit card providers. Thanksgiving passed, Christmas, New Year's. The holidays he'd always spent with family became solo affairs, Chinese takeout and Netflix, and the quiet of an empty house. His mother didn't call, Diane didn't text. Emma sent a Christmas card with a generic message and no personal note. Probably sent to everyone on her list, family and acquaintances treated exactly the same. Marcus told himself he was fine, told himself the freedom was worth it, told himself that being true to himself, choosing his own happiness, was the right decision. He almost believed it. January became February, became March. The anniversary of his decision, or was it a decision? Had waking up in the past been his choice? Approached and passed. A full year since he'd declined Diane's phone call, had refused to sell the bike, had chosen himself over family obligation. A full year of being alone. On a Saturday in late March, Marcus was in his garage working on routine maintenance. Oil change, checking the timing, the small rituals that kept the black bomber running perfectly. His phone rang, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Is this Marcus Chen? Yes. This is Jennifer Huang. My father, Robert Huang, spoke with you last year about your Honda CB 450. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. I remember. I told him it wasn't for sale. I know, that's not why I'm calling. A pause. My father passed away 2 months ago. Heart attack. He was only 56. I'm sorry for your loss, Marcus said, and meant it. Thank you. The thing is, he talked about your bike all the time. About how you turned down his offer, how you clearly loved it. How it was people like you who kept these machines alive. Jennifer's voice caught slightly. He respected that. Respected you. Marcus didn't know what to say. Anyway, I'm going through his collection now, figuring out what to keep, what to sell. He had 43 motorcycles. Can you believe that? Some of them worth more than my house. She laughed, but it sounded sad. And I kept thinking about what he said about you, about loving the bike more than the money. Why are you calling me? Because I found something in his notes. A file labeled Black Bomber, Chen. And in it, he'd written down that your bike could potentially be worth upwards of $300,000 if it won Best in Show at certain competitions. If it was sold to the right collector. Marcus went very still. Mr. Chen? You still there? I'm here. Did you know about the value? Marcus thought about the future he remembered. The auction, the $287,000 price tag. Thought about dying on a marble floor and waking up with a second chance. I knew it was valuable, he said carefully, and you still kept it, even when you could have made a fortune. Yes, Jennifer was quiet for a moment. My father would have liked that, would have said you understood what really mattered. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his garage, phone in hand, staring at the black bomber. $300,000. Robert Huang had known, or suspected, had researched it, documented it, kept a file on a bike he'd never owned and never would. And still Marcus had said no when he'd called to make an offer, had said no knowing what he was turning down, had chosen the bike, and the freedom, and himself. The empty garage suddenly felt less like loneliness and more like space, room to breathe, room to be something other than the family problem solver, the reliable one, the person who said yes. Marcus stood up, walked to the motorcycle, ran his hand along the fuel tank. The metal was smooth and cool, perfect and unchanging. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. This is Jennifer Huang. I hope this isn't weird, but I have a photo I thought you might want to see. An image loaded. Robert Huang in his garage, surrounded by motorcycles, smiling at the camera. And on the wall behind him, barely visible, a printed photograph of a black bomber. Marcus's black bomber. Another text. He printed that from your forum post, said it was one of the finest restorations he'd ever seen. I thought you should know. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time. Robert Huang had died never owning the bike, never riding it, never adding it to his collection. But he'd respected it. Respected the restoration, respected Marcus's decision to keep it. A stranger had understood what his family couldn't or wouldn't. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in a year. He opened a group text with Diane and Emma. I know it's been a while. I know things are still weird, but I wanted you to know I'm okay. And I hope you're okay too. He stared at the message for 5 minutes before sending it. The response was immediate. From Diane. Who's this? Marcus almost laughed. She'd deleted his contact info, apparently. Made him a stranger in her phone. It's Marcus. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Appeared again. From Emma. Hi. Just that. One word, not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. I'm not apologizing for the bike, Marcus typed, but I am sorry we haven't talked. Several minutes passed, then, I'm sorry too, from Emma. I miss you, even though I'm still mad at you. That's fair, Marcus replied. Diane didn't respond. The 3-dot indicator appeared and disappeared several times, but no message came through. Marcus set down his phone and went to bed. It wasn't reconciliation, wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a possibility of thaw. Maybe that was enough for now. 2 years passed. Marcus's life settled into new patterns, new rhythms. He became a fixture in the vintage motorcycle community, known for his immaculate black bomber and his skill with restorations. People started coming to him for advice, for help with their own projects. He started taking on small restoration jobs on the side, just for the satisfaction of bringing old machines back to life. His relationship with his family remained complicated. Emma reached out occasionally, brief texts on holidays and birthdays, superficial questions about his life that he answered honestly but without detail. They were cordial, distant, like acquaintances who used to be close and were trying to remember how. Diane remained silent, a wall of ice that showed no signs of thawing. His mother sent a Christmas card the second year. No note inside, just her signature. But it was something. Marcus dated occasionally, met people through work, through the motorcycle club, through random encounters at coffee shops and bookstores. Some relationships lasted a few weeks, some a few months. None of them stuck. But he was okay with that. He'd spent so long defining himself by his usefulness to others that learning to just be himself, unattached and undefined, felt like its own kind of restoration work. In the fall of 2025, Marcus got a call from a curator at the Motorcycle Hall of Fame Museum. Mr. Chen, my name is David Torres. I'm calling about your 1967 Honda CB 450 Black Bomber. Marcus's pulse quickened. How did you get my number? The vintage motorcycle community is smaller than you think. Your restoration work is well known. And your bike, David paused. Mr. Chen, we'd like to feature it in an upcoming exhibition on Japanese motorcycle history, the 1960s innovation era. Would you be interested? Feature it? You mean display it? Yes, for 3 months at our museum in Ohio. We'd cover all transportation and insurance costs. Of course, and we'd credit you as the restorer. Marcus thought about the future he remembered. About the bike sitting in a museum in Dubai, untouched and unloved. Just another acquisition for a collector who'd never ridden it. Would I be able to visit? He asked. Absolutely. We'd actually love it if you could attend the opening reception, maybe give a talk about the restoration process. I'll have to think about it. Of course, take your time. But I hope you'll say yes. Bikes like yours, they deserve to be seen, to be celebrated. After David hung up, Marcus stood in his garage looking at the black bomber. In the future, he remembered, he'd sold it. Watched it be carted away, never ridden again, eventually sold to the highest bidder and locked in a museum. Now he had the chance to share it on his own terms. Oh, to let people see the work he'd done, the history he'd preserved. To tell the story himself. He called David back an hour later and said yes. The exhibition opened in January 2026, almost 3 years to the day since Marcus had woken up in his garage with a second chance. He drove the Black Bomber to Ohio himself, a 3-day journey through winter roads, staying in motels and eating at truck stops, feeling the bike underneath him, responsive and alive. At night, he'd park in covered garages and double-check the tie-downs, protective about his restoration even after all this time. The museum was impressive, a sprawling complex dedicated to motorcycle history with bikes dating back to the 1800s. David Torres met him at the delivery entrance, enthusiastic and knowledgeable, clearly passionate about motorcycles. So wait, this is even more beautiful in person, David said, walking around the Black Bomber with reverent care. The restoration is flawless. Thank you. We're going to feature it as the centerpiece of the Japanese innovation section. 1960s Honda engineering that changed the industry. David smiled. Your bike represents a turning point in motorcycle history. Do you know that? Marcus thought about 3 years of Saturday mornings, midnight oil changes, tracking down original parts across 3 states, thought about saying no to his family, about choosing himself, about the price he'd paid and the freedom he'd gained. I know it's important, he said. The opening reception was the following evening. Marcus wore the same navy suit he'd worn to Emma's wedding. It still fit, still looked good. The museum was packed with collectors, enthusiasts, journalists, people who understood and appreciated the machines on display. Marcus's talk about the restoration process was scheduled for 7 p.m. He'd prepared notes, practiced what he'd say, but when he stood at the podium and looked out at the audience, the script seemed inadequate. I bought the frame for this bike at an estate sale, he began. The owner had died, and his kids didn't want it, didn't know what it was worth, didn't care. They sold me 3 years of their father's work for $500. The audience listened, attentive. It took me another 3 years to finish the restoration, not because it was complicated, though it was, but because I wanted to do it right, to honor the original builder, to honor Honda's engineering, to honor the history. Marcus paused. And somewhere along the way, it became about more than the bike. It became about having something that was mine, something I didn't have to share or sacrifice or justify to anyone. He told them about the research, the challenges, the small victories. He didn't mention his family, didn't mention the future he remembered, just talked about the work, the satisfaction, the love of bringing history back to life. When he finished, the audience applauded. People came up afterward with questions, compliments, their own restoration stories. Marcus stayed for hours, talking to fellow enthusiasts, surrounded by people who understood. One older man, maybe 70, with calloused hands and oil-stained fingernails, shook Marcus's hand with a grip like iron. You did good work, son. Your bike. It'll outlive all of us. That's what matters. You're leaving something behind that's made with care. Marcus thought about his father, dying with debt and regrets, about the Mustang sold for Diane's college, about sacrifice and family and the price of saying yes to everything. Thank you, he said. That night in his hotel room, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the exhibition, about the Black Bomber on display for thousands of people to see, about the placard that read, 1967, Honda CB 450 Black Bomber, restored by Marcus Chen. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. No calls from family, no texts from Emma, No reconciliation waiting at the end of this journey, but also no regrets. He picked up the phone and opened the photo gallery. Scrolled back through years of photos, the restoration process, documented Saturday by Saturday, then further back to photos from before. Family photos, holidays, birthdays, Emma's engagement party, Diane's 40th birthday, their father's funeral. Marcus looked at his own face in those photos and barely recognized the person staring back. Someone who smiled automatically, who said yes reflexively, who measured his worth by how much he could give away. That person had died on a marble floor at a wedding reception, surrounded by family who'd taken everything he'd offered and still found him wanting. This person, the one who'd said no, who'd chosen himself, who'd spent 3 years alone but free, was still figuring out who he was. But he was alive. Marcus set down his phone and finally slept, dreamless and deep. The exhibition ran for 3 months, just as David had promised. Marcus visited twice, once at the opening. Once at the midpoint to check on the bike and give another talk. Each time, crowds gathered around the black bomber, taking photos, asking questions, marveling at the restoration. A journalist from a motorcycle magazine interviewed him for a feature article. "Preserving History, One Bike at a Time," the headline read. The article included photos of the bike and Marcus, quotes about passion and dedication and the importance of saving mechanical heritage. His mother saw it. He knew because Emma texted him. "Mom saw your article. She didn't say anything, but she cut it out and put it on her fridge." Marcus didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't know if it was an olive branch or just his mother's inability to throw away anything her children did that made it into print. He didn't respond to Emma's text. In March, as the exhibition was winding down, Marcus got another call, this time from a number he didn't recognize. International code. "Mr. Chen, this is Abdul Rahman calling from Dubai. I'm a collector of vintage motorcycles, and I saw the article about your black bomber." Marcus's heart sank. Here it was. The inevitable offer. The collector from Dubai who, in another timeline, had bought the bike for a museum. "I'm not interested in selling," Marcus said immediately. "I understand. That's not why I'm calling." Abdul's English was perfect. Accent British educated. "I'm actually calling because I'm curating a private exhibition of vintage Japanese motorcycles. Invitation only, in Dubai this September. I'd like to invite you to display your bike." "In Dubai?" "Yes, all expenses paid, of course. Transportation for you and the bike. Accommodation. A small speaking fee. The exhibition would run for 1 week only. Some of the most significant motorcycles in history. Your black bomber would be an exceptional company." Marcus thought about the museum he'd never see. In the timeline he'd escaped. Thought about his bike sitting behind glass, untouched forever. Would I be able to ride it there? The bike, I mean. In Dubai? Abdul laughed, surprised. Most collectors would never risk that. But, yes, if you wanted to, we could arrange it. Then I'll consider it. Excellent. I'll send you more information. And Mr. Chen, thank you for keeping that bike alive. Not just restored, but alive. There aren't enough people who understand the difference anymore. After the call, Marcus walked into his garage. The black bomber was still in Ohio. Wouldn't return for another month. But the space where it lived was there. The oil stain on the floor, the tools on the wall, the smell of motor oil and old leather that never quite went away. He'd been given a second chance, had chosen differently, had paid a price and gained a freedom, and now doors were opening that hadn't existed in the first timeline. Opportunities, connections, possibilities. Maybe that was the real value of the bike. Not the $250,000 it could have sold for. Not the museum where it would have sat untouched. But the life it had given him when he'd finally chosen to keep something for himself. Dubai in September was hot and surreal. A city of impossible towers and engineered excess. The exhibition was held in a private gallery owned by Abdul Rahman himself, climate-controlled and secure. He's housing some of the most valuable motorcycles in the world. Marcus's black bomber sat between a 1969 Honda CB 750 that had won the Isle of Man TT and a 1965 Honda RC 166 that had dominated Grand Prix racing. The company was humbling. Abdul was younger than Marcus had imagined, maybe 45, with an easy smile and genuine passion for motorcycles that transcended mere collecting. "You actually ride it," he said when they met, shaking Marcus's hand. "I can tell. The bike doesn't have that museum smell. It smells like road," Marcus smiled. "Is there any other way?" "Not for people like us. But collectors? Abdul shook his head. They buy history and lock it away. You keep it alive? That's rare. The exhibition was attended by collectors from around the world, people with money and taste and an appreciation for engineering history. Marcus gave his talk about the restoration, answered questions, accepted compliments with a humility he'd learned from years of online forum interactions. On the third day, Abdul approached him with an unusual request. There's someone I'd like you to meet. He's not attending the public showings, but he heard about your bike and asked specifically to see it. They walked through the gallery to a private viewing room where an elderly Japanese man sat in a wheelchair, attended by a younger woman, his daughter, Marcus guessed. Abdul introduced them. Mr. Chen, this is Hiroshi Yamada. He worked for Honda in the 1960s, was part of the engineering team that designed the CB 450. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Mr. Yamada, it's an honor. Hiroshi's English was halting but clear. May I see the bike? They wheeled him to where the black bomber was displayed. The old man reached out with a trembling hand, touched the fuel tank with a gentleness that spoke of recognition and memory. I worked on the prototypes, Hiroshi said softly. 1964, 1965. We wanted to make something special, something that would show the world what Honda could do. You succeeded, Marcus said. Hiroshi smiled. I heard you restored this one yourself. Factory original, yes? Yes, every part. The electrical system? That was difficult? Marcus laughed. Very. I must have rewired it 3 times before I got it right. Good. Hiroshi patted the bike affectionately. That means you learned. That means you understand. He looked up at Marcus with eyes that were sharp despite his age. Most people want the result without the struggle. Want to buy history instead of preserve it. But you did the work. They talked for an hour, Hiroshi sharing stories from the design process, the challenges they'd faced, the innovations they'd pioneered. Marcus listened, absorbing every word, every detail about the bike he'd spent 3 years bringing back to life. When it was time for Hiroshi to leave, he took Marcus's hand in both of his own. Thank you, the old man said, for keeping our work alive, for understanding that these machines are not just metal, they are dreams made real. And dreams should not gather dust. After he left, Marcus stood alone with the black bomber, feeling the weight of those words. Dreams made real. Dreams that shouldn't gather dust. He thought about the dream he'd killed in the first timeline. The dream of keeping something for himself, of saying no, of being more than the family problem solver. That dream had died when he'd sold the bike, had haunted him through Emma's wedding, had followed him to a marble floor and a moment of terrible clarity. This timeline, this life, was what happened when you kept the dream alive, when you chose yourself, when you said no and meant it and lived with the consequences. The exhibition ended. Marcus shipped the black bomber back to the U.S., took a few extra days in Dubai to explore the city, to ride a rented motorcycle through desert highways at sunset, to feel the freedom of motion in a place where nobody knew him and nobody expected anything. On his last night, Abdul invited him to dinner at an absurdly expensive restaurant with a view of the Burj Khalifa. I have a proposal, Abdul said over dessert. I'm organizing a vintage motorcycle tour next year. 6 countries, 6 weeks, following historic racing routes through Europe. I'd like you to join us. With the black bomber? If you're willing to ride it that far, Abdul smiled. Most collectors would ship their bikes in trucks between stops, but I have a feeling you'd prefer to actually ride. You're right. The group is small. 8 riders, all of us with significant bikes. All of us who believe these machines should be used, not just displayed. Marcus thought about 6 weeks in Europe, riding through history on a bike he'd brought back from near death. Thought about the life he'd built in the past 3 years. Solitary, yes, but free. Thought about the family that had cut him off for choosing himself, and whether he even wanted to rebuild those bridges anymore. I'll do it, he said. Abdul raised his glass. To keeping dreams alive. Marcus raised his own glass, clinked it against Abdul's. To saying no when it matters. They drank, and Marcus felt something settle into place inside him. Not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated joy of family acceptance and belonging, but something deeper, something more solid. Peace. Marcus returned home to find a letter waiting in his mailbox, hand-addressed, his mother's careful script. He sat in his car for a long time before opening it. Dear Marcus, I saw your article in the motorcycle magazine. I saw the photos from Dubai. I've been following your restoration work online, though I didn't tell you because I didn't know what to say. Your father would be proud. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at that dinner 3 years ago, about the Mustang, about sacrifice, about how we measure love by what we're willing to give up. I think you were right. I think we asked too much, expected too much, took too much. I don't know if you want to hear this. I don't know if it's too late, but I want you to know that I understand now what you were trying to say, what you were trying to keep. Diane is still angry. Emma is hurt. I don't know if they'll come around, but I'm trying to understand that maybe loving your family doesn't mean sacrificing everything for them. Maybe it means being honest about what you can give and what you need to keep for yourself. Maybe it means sometimes saying, no, I'd like to see you, not to apologize, not to ask for anything, just to see you, to hear about Dubai and the exhibition and the bike that's become more than just a bike. If you want to, call me. If you don't, I'll understand. Love, Mom. Marcus sat in his car, reading and rereading the letter, feeling something crack open in his chest. Not quite reconciliation, not quite forgiveness, but possibility. He thought about the future he'd escaped, dying on a marble floor, bitter and alone despite being surrounded by family. Thought about the future he'd chosen, isolated but free, owning his choices and their consequences. Maybe there was a third option. Maybe there was something between total sacrifice and total solitude. Maybe. He took out his phone and stared at his mother's contact information for a long time. Then he made the call. Marcus? His mother's voice was tentative, hopeful. Hi, Mom? You got my letter? Yeah. A pause. And I'd like to see you too. Maybe Sunday dinner? Like old times? He could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. Yes, I'll make pot roast. That sounds good. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his car, surrounded by the familiar sounds of his neighborhood. A dog barking, kids playing basketball down the street, the distant rumble of traffic on the highway, the sound of normal life continuing. He got out of the car and walked into his house, then through to the garage. The Black Bomber wasn't there yet. Still in transit from Dubai, would arrive next week, but its space was waiting. The oil stain on the floor like a marker, like a promise. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery, scrolled back through pictures from Dubai, from the exhibition in Ohio, from 3 years of restoration work, then further to the old photos, family photos. The ones he'd looked at in that hotel room in Ohio, his father at 30, standing next to the Mustang he'd sold, smiling, but with something sad in his eyes. Marcus wondered if his father had any regrets at the end. If he'd wished he'd kept one thing for himself. Just one. If he'd looked back on a life of sacrifice and felt it had been worth it. He'd never know. His father was gone, and those questions had gone with him. But Marcus had been given something his father never had. A second chance, a do-over, a moment of terrible clarity, followed by an opportunity to choose differently. And he had said no, had kept the bike, had lost his family and found himself, had paid the price and earned the freedom. Now maybe he was getting a chance at the third option, at having both. Self and family, freedom and belonging. Well, the bike and the relationship, maybe. Sunday dinner would tell. But for now, Marcus stood in his empty garage, surrounded by tools and the smell of motor oil, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. He walked to where the Black Bomber would stand when it returned, put his hand on the empty air, imagining the cool metal of the fuel tank, the leather seat, the chrome pipes. We did it, he said to the absence, to the future, to himself. We kept the dream alive. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a spring storm rolling in, the way they did in April. The smell of ozone and rain drifted through the open garage door. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched the sky turn the color of an old bruise, watched the first drops begin to fall. Tap, 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 the sound of thunder, the sound of storms passing. The sound of new beginnings. He closed the garage door and went inside to figure out what to bring to Sunday dinner. It had been 3 years. He'd changed. They'd changed. Everything was different now. But family was still family. And maybe, just maybe, that could mean something new. Something better. Something worth keeping. The storm broke over the house, rain hammering on the roof, wind shaking the trees. Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook, making a list of things he wanted to say on Sunday. boundaries he needed to set, truths he needed to speak, ways to be both himself and their family member without sacrificing one for the other. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about the past 3 years had been easy, but he'd rebuilt a motorcycle from scattered parts and scattered dreams. He'd said no when everyone wanted yes. He'd chosen himself when family demanded sacrifice. He could do this too. The rain fell, and Marcus planned, and the Black Bomber made its way across the ocean toward home, toward the garage where it belonged, toward the life Marcus had chosen. A life with room for dreams. A life with boundaries and freedom and possibility. A life where no was a complete sentence and yes was a choice, not an obligation. The thunder rolled, and Marcus Chen, who had died on a marble floor and been reborn in a garage, smiled. He'd kept the dream alive, and that made all the difference.